The morning Marcus Hale received the job offer that would change everything. He was sharpening a blade that did not need sharpening. This was not unusual. He did it every morning, had done it for 30 years, would do it until the day his hands stopped working well enough to hold the whetstone properly. His first instructor had told him to do it, and he had done it, and eventually the reason his instructor gave him had become his own reason, which was this. Everything else he did in a day depended on whether he had first done something he could control completely, and done it right. The stone moved along the edge with a sound like a slow breath. The academy was quiet at this hour. His 3 students would not arrive for another 90 minutes. The training hall was empty and clean, the floor swept the way it was swept every morning by Marcus himself, not because he could not afford someone to sweep it, but because the sweeping was part of the preparation, and the preparation was part of the work, and the work began before the students arrived. Major Diane Foster appeared in the doorway at 6:37 hours, and Marcus knew it was her before he looked up because her footsteps had not changed in 12 years. She said, "I have a job for you." He said, "Sit down." She sat on the bench along the wall, the bench where students waited before sessions, and she put a file on the bench beside her, and did not reach for it because she had known Marcus long enough to know that he finished what he was doing before he started the next thing. He finished with the blade. He set the whetstone down. He looked at the blade in the morning light from the high windows and found it satisfactory and put it on the rack with the others. He sat across from Foster. She told him about the Thessari kingdom. Ancient civilization, 800 years of recorded monarchy, deeply hierarchical in the way that civilizations become when the hierarchy has worked for long enough that it has become indistinguishable from the air. They had requested a human swordmaster through diplomatic channels 3 months ago. The request had moved through 7 levels of coalition bureaucracy before landing on Foster's desk, because Foster handled unusual placements, and this was unusual. The request was from Princess Kaelrin, heir to the Thessari throne. She wanted a human instructor, specifically human. She had read something about human blade technique, or heard something, or formed an impression through some channel that the file did not fully clarify, and she had decided she wanted to learn from it. 1 year, the palace, full room and board, and a rate of pay that made Marcus look at the figure twice. He asked 3 questions. How many students? 1, the princess exclusively. Duration, 1 year with option to extend by mutual agreement. What he was permitted to teach, full discretion. The palace would not dictate curriculum. He did not ask about rank, ceremony, court protocol, the correct way to address a member of the Thessari royal family, the formal greeting sequence, the appropriate positioning of one's hands during a royal audience, or any of the other things that Foster's briefing materials covered in considerable detail. She noticed. She said, "Marcus, the Thessari are formal, extremely formal. There are specific ways to address the princess, specific ways to enter a room, specific protocols for every interaction in that court. I have a document here that covers the essential." Marcus said, "I teach people to fight. I don't adjust how I teach for an audience." Foster looked at him. She had known Marcus for 12 years. She had sent him on 3 previous unusual placements, and he had performed all 3 without incident, if you defined incident in specific ways and did not count the things that had technically happened but had not resulted in formal complaints. She said, "Just try not to start a diplomatic incident in the first week." Marcus considered this. Which week is acceptable? Foster picked up the file and stood. "I'll send you the briefing materials. Read the greeting sequence section at least." He did read it. He read it on the transit to the Thessari system, sitting in a small cabin with the file open on the fold-down table. He read the 11-step greeting sequence twice. He read the section on forms of address. He read the section on spatial positioning in royal chambers, which specified that persons of non-Thessari origin should maintain a minimum distance of 4 body lengths from any member of the royal family, unless explicitly invited closer. He closed the file. He looked out the viewport at the stars for a while. He opened his notebook and wrote one line, 11 steps. He thought about it. He wrote beneath it some of them. Kael'das Palace was everything the briefing materials had described, and several things they had not, the primary thing being its quality of light. It was built from a pale stone that the Thessari had quarried from their moon across 800 years of construction, and the light that came through its high windows had a quality that Marcus had not encountered before, something between silver and gold depending on the time of day, and it fell across every surface with the particular precision of architecture that had been designed to work with it, rather than merely accommodate it. High Chamberlain Vethsan was waiting at the main entrance. He was not alone. He was accompanied by 6 court officials in formal robes arranged in a specific configuration that Marcus would later understand was the Thessari official welcome formation, and by 4 attendants carrying items of symbolic significance that the 11-step greeting sequence was designed to interact with in a specific order, and by a herald with a scroll who would read the formal acknowledgement of arrival, and by the first 3 steps of the 11-step greeting sequence already in progress in the sense that Vethsan's formal posture and the arrangement of his hands were the beginning of it, waiting for the corresponding gesture from the arriving party to proceed. Marcus walked up to him. He set his bag down. He looked at Vethsan and said, "I appreciate the welcome. Where is the training hall?" Vethsan was a man who had spent 40 years managing a royal court, and in that time had developed the specific internal quality of a person who has seen everything and is no longer surprised by anything. He maintained this quality now, which was to say that his expression did not change, his posture did not shift, and none of the 40 years of court discipline he had built showed any visible sign of the adjustment they were currently making. He said, "I will show you the way." He dismissed the formation with a subtle gesture that Marcus did not see, because Marcus was picking up his bag. They walked through the palace. Vethsan walked and talked simultaneously, which was one of the skills his 40 years had produced, delivering the essential information about court structure and hierarchy and protocol in the measured, efficient language of someone who had delivered it many times. He covered the forms of address. He covered the spatial conventions. He covered the significance of the training hall as a formal space and the expectations governing behavior within it. Marcus listened. He nodded at appropriate moments. He asked one clarifying question about the training hall dimensions. When Vethsan finished, Marcus said, "That's useful context. Does the princess train in the morning or the afternoon?" Vethsan said, "The princess's schedule is flexible." Marcus said, "I prefer mornings. The body learns differently in the morning, but she is the one being trained. If she has a strong preference for afternoons, I can work with afternoons." Vethsan said, "I will inquire." "Thank you," Marcus said, and looked up at the silver-gold light coming through a high window as they turned a corner, and something in his face settled into a quality of quiet interest that Vethsan noted without being able to categorize. The training hall was the largest room Marcus had been in that was specifically dedicated to blade work. He had trained in palace facilities before on one of his previous placements, but this was something different in scale, the ceiling high enough that its upper reaches were in slight shadow, the floor a pale wood that had been maintained for centuries and showed it in the quality of its surface. Weapon racks along 2 walls. Light from windows set high, designed to illuminate without blinding. A space that had been built by people who understood what the space was for and had built it accordingly. He set his bag down. He began to move through the space, walking its dimensions, checking the floor at several points with his foot, looking at the window angles. He was doing this when Sarathvel walked in. Marcus had not read about Sarathvel in Foster's briefing materials, because Sarethvel had not been in Foster's briefing materials, which was an omission that Marcus would later understand was not accidental. Sarethvel was the Grand Blade Master of the Thessari Kingdom, a title that had existed in some form for 800 years, and that Sarethvel had held for 20 of them, and his presence in the briefing materials would have raised questions that certain people at the diplomatic coordination level had preferred not to raise. He was tall, as all Thessari were, with the silver skin that caught the hall light and the formal bearing of a person for whom formality had long since become something he did not perform, but simply was. His blade was on his hip, and it was the blade of a master, made for him specifically, carrying 20 years of marks of rank on its handle. He looked at Marcus the way a person looks at something they have already decided the value of, and are examining only to confirm that decision. He said, in formal Thessari that his translator rendered with full titles intact, "You will address me as Grand Blade Master. You will not enter this hall without acknowledgement of rank. You will conduct any instruction under my supervision and within the parameters of Thessari blade tradition." Marcus looked at him. He said, "I'll call you Sarethvel. I work alone, and if the princess wanted her training supervised, she would have hired 2 instructors." He turned back to checking the window angles. Sarethvel stood in the doorway of the training hall and experienced something he had not experienced in the hall in 20 years, which was the specific sensation of having said a thing, and having that thing not land in any of the ways he was accustomed to things landing. It was not refusal. Refusal had a texture he knew. This was something else. This was a man who had heard him and processed the words, and found that the words did not apply to his situation in any way he could practically accommodate, and had communicated this fact without any apparent awareness that it should have been communicated differently. He left the hall. In his private chambers, he began composing a formal complaint. Vethsan had the complaint on his desk by evening. He read all 11 items. They were accurate. Every protocol violation listed had occurred and could be verified by witnesses. He set the complaint aside and went to look at the observation screen that showed the training hall, where Marcus was running a series of movements alone, slowly, methodically, running each one until it reached the particular quality of rightness he was apparently looking for, and then stopping and making a note in a small notebook. He watched for 22 minutes. He filed the complaint appropriately and did not act on it immediately. The princess arrived for her first session on the morning of the 3rd day. She arrived correctly, on time to the minute, full formal dress for a training occasion, which was different from full formal dress for a court occasion but still formal by most species standards. 2 personal attendants. She entered the training hall with the posture of someone who had been entering important rooms since she could walk, and had learned the posture before she had learned the reason for it. Marcus was already there. He had moved 3 of the training stands to the periphery of the hall. He had laid 2 blades on the central floor. He was standing in the middle of the space reading his notebook, and he looked up when she entered. He said, "Good morning. Leave the attendants outside. We start in 5 minutes." The attendants looked at the princess. The princess looked at Marcus. She had been briefed on the human instructor by 3 separate people in the week before his arrival, and the briefings had covered his credentials and his reputation and his history of unusual placements, and none of them had covered the specific experience of a person telling her something in the same tone her father used when he told her to eat breakfast. She sent the attendants outside. She stood in the training hall with Marcus and said, "You did not bow." He said, "I don't bow in a training hall. Nobody does, not because it's disrespect, because the floor is for work, not ceremony. This space has one job and everything in it serves that job." He paused. "I didn't write the rule, I just noticed it's true." Kaelrin looked at him for a moment. She was 24 years old by Thessari reckoning, and she was the heir to a kingdom 800 years old, and she had been told many things in her life by many people, and most of those things had been delivered with a quality of performance that the people delivering them applied carefully, calibrating tone and phrasing to her rank and her expectations. This man was not delivering anything. He was statting. She said, "What is my first lesson?" He said, "Show me how you hold a blade." She picked up one of the blades from the floor. She took her stance. Her grip was correct. Her stance was correct. Her posture was correct. 20 years of Sarathvel's training in every detail, precise and complete, technically irreproachable. Marcus looked at it. He said, "That's what someone taught you. Now show me what you do when you're afraid." She stood with the blade. 43 seconds passed. She did not know what to show him. She had been trained since she was 4 years old, and the training had produced a complete technical system that she could reproduce under any conditions, in any context, with full precision. She had reproduced it under examination conditions, under formal review conditions, under Sarathvel's critical observation over 20 years. She had never been asked to show what she did when she was afraid, because the instruction had always been about performing correctly, and performing correctly was supposed to preclude fear rather than work alongside it. She did not know what she did when she was afraid. And then she did know, because she had been afraid once, genuinely and completely, at the age of 16 during a security incident in the outer palace. And in that moment she had picked up the nearest blade-shaped object and held it low and close to her body and moved backward toward a wall. And none of that had been what Sarathvel taught her, but it had been what she had done, and it had kept her still enough until the security detail arrived. She dropped her formal stance. She held the blade lower, closer to her body, the way she had held it then. Marcus said, "There, that is where we start." In the observation gallery above the training hall, Veth-san was watching. He had not planned to be there. He had come to deal with a scheduling matter that brought him past the gallery corridor and had stopped, and now he was watching. He watched the princess stand with the blade, in the position that was not correct by any formal standard, and that was clearly something entirely her own. And he watched Marcus look at it with the focused attention of someone who has found what he came to find. He watched this for a while. He could not categorize it. After 40 years, he had a category for everything that happened in this court. He had no category for this. He left and dealt with the scheduling matter. Sarathvel's formal complaint process ran its course over the following 3 weeks and produced a review board finding of 9 confirmed violations and a formal reprimand. Veth-san delivered the reprimand to Marcus personally, because some things required the personal delivery, and because he wanted to see what happened when it was delivered. He read all 9 items. He explained the relevant protocols. He was thorough and professional. Marcus listened to all of it. Then he said, "I understand. Is the princess improving?" Veth-san paused. "Yes," he said. "Has she requested to continue?" "Yes." Marcus said, "Then you have a protocol problem and a result. I'm not dismissing the protocol problem. 9 things I did wrong are 9 things, but you need to tell me which one matters more, because they're pointing in different directions and I need to know where you're standing before I can tell you where I can meet you." Veth-san looked at him for a long moment. He said, "Learn the greeting sequence." Marcus said, "How many steps?" 11. "I can learn 9 honestly. 11 would be a performance and I don't perform well." Veth-san looked at him. He thought about 40 years of managing foreign specialists, all of whom had adjusted, all of whom had eventually understood where the lines were and had placed themselves accordingly. He thought about what it would mean to negotiate down to 9 steps with a human swordmaster, and whether that negotiation would be visible to others, and what its visibility would communicate. He said 10. Marcus said 9. Veth-san said 9 and walked away. He was thinking about the fact that he had just negotiated down from 11 to 9, and that it had felt, in some way he could not fully characterize, like a fair result. 6 weeks passed. Marcus taught the princess 3 things in those 6 weeks. Not 20. Not a comprehensive curriculum covering the full range of Thessari blade tradition and its 800 years of development. 3 things, taught repeatedly, practiced until the practicing became automatic, and then practiced further until the automatic became genuine. The first thing was about weight. Where the weight was before the movement began mattered more than where the blade was after the movement ended. This was not a new principle in any blade tradition. It was simply a principle that had been stated but not drilled in 20 years of the princess's training, because Sarathvel's tradition emphasized the movement itself, and the weight was assumed to follow. It did not always follow. The princess had beautiful movements built on an unreliable foundation. Marcus fixed the foundation. The movements became less beautiful and considerably more real. The second thing was about decision. The moment of decision to move preceded the movement by a fraction of a second that could be felt by an attentive opponent, and that gave away more information than any visible preparation. Training the decision meant training what happened in the body in that fraction of a second, the specific quality of commitment that preceded action, and that, when trained, produced movement without the preceding signal. The princess found this one difficult. It required her to be honest about the moment of commitment in a way that her training had not previously required, because her training had focused on the action and had assumed the commitment was already there. It was not always there. Sometimes she moved before she had committed. The blade training made this visible in ways that were uncomfortable. She practiced it anyway. The third thing was about fear. He did not teach her to ignore it. He did not teach her to control it or to push through it or to perform despite it. He taught her to read it. Fear was information, specific and usually accurate information about the actual state of the situation. And the most useful thing a fighter could do with accurate information was to receive it clearly and act on what it said rather than on what they had planned before the information arrived. This was the one that took the most time. Vethsan watched from the observation gallery whenever he could. He was trying to understand what was happening to the princess. She was not improving in any way his framework for improvement could fully accommodate. She was not becoming more technically precise. She was becoming something for which he did not have a precise term, something that had to do with the difference between a very good reproduction of a thing and the thing itself. He went to the corridor outside the training hall one evening and found Marcus there running a cloth along his blade after the session, and he said, "What are you teaching her?" Marcus said, "How to be honest in a situation where honesty is difficult." Vethsan said, "That is not blade technique." Marcus said, "Everything is blade technique." Vethsan thought about this for the rest of the evening, and arrived at nothing conclusive, and added it to the collection of things about this human that he was accumulating in a part of his thinking that had no formal file. Sarathvel watched every session he could access through the observation screen. He told himself he was monitoring for protocol violations. He was also watching something else, a quality he had been tracking in the princess's movement since the 3rd week, a quality he had not seen in 20 years of her training, and that he was having difficulty naming. He named it on the day she made a movement he had seen her attempt 200 times across 20 years, a specific transition that had always been her weakest, a transition she had compensated for in 3 different ways over the years without ever fully solving it, and that she made on this day with a quality of simple rightness that meant the compensation was gone, and the thing itself was present. He stood at the observation screen for a long time after that. He filed his challenge 2 days later. The formal challenge document came to Marcus through Vethsan, delivered in a sealed court envelope of the kind, reserved for communications of significant standing. Marcus opened it. He read it. It was a challenge to a formal blade contest under ancient Thessari law, invoking the Grand Blade Master's right to test any practitioner claiming to practice blade mastery in the royal court. Marcus said, when? Vethsan said, 3 days, the training hall, full court attendance. Marcus nodded. Vethsan said, you understand what this means for your position here if you do not perform adequately. Marcus said, yes. Vethsan said, Sarethvel has won 47 formal challenges. He has not lost one in 20 years of this position. Marcus said, okay. Vethsan said, he is very good. Marcus said, I know. I've been watching him watch me for 3 months. Vethsan said, he will try to end it quickly, in front of everyone. Marcus said, yes, he paused, so will I. In his private chambers, Sarethvel prepared. He was methodical about preparation. He had been methodical about everything that mattered for 20 years. He reviewed his analysis of Marcus's technique, the notes he had kept across 3 months of observation. He cataloged the habits. He mapped the tendencies. He identified 3 specific angles of weakness that his analysis had produced. The left side preference, the slight deceleration in the transition from defense to offense, the incomplete guard on the lower right when the opponent pressured high left. 3 reliable openings. Any one of them was sufficient. All 3 in sequence was certainty. He was confident. Beneath the confidence was something he had been aware of since the day in the training hall 6 weeks ago, when the princess had made the transition she had never made cleanly in 20 years. He had been aware of it without giving it full attention, because giving it full attention would have required him to do something uncomfortable with it. He set it aside again. He focused on what he knew. He was the Grand Blade Master of the Thessari Kingdom. 47 victories. 20 years of service. He had been a master of this tradition since before this human had arrived on the planet, and he would be a master of it after this human returned to wherever he had come from. He went to bed prepared and woke up prepared and arrived at the training hall on the morning of the challenge prepared. The princess found Marcus in the training hall the evening before the challenge. He was sharpening his blade. She said, you should know that Sarethvel studies opponents. He has been watching your sessions. Marcus said, yes. He knows your habits. Yes. She said, he knows you favor your left. He knows you slow in the transition. He knows the lower right guard. Marcus said, yes. She said, you know he knows. Yes. She said, then why haven't you fixed them? Marcus looked up from the blade. He looked at her in the way he sometimes looked at her in sessions. The specific quality of attention that she had come to understand meant he was seeing something he found worth seeing. He said, because knowing a habit and knowing what someone does when the habit is interrupted are 2 different things. He has been watching me for 3 months. He knows exactly what I do. He does not know what I do when what I do stops working. She thought about this. She thought about her first session, about 43 seconds of not knowing what to show him, about the fear lesson, about the decision lesson. She said, he has never seen you interrupted. Marcus said, no. She said, the 6 inches. He looked at her. She said, you are not quite where someone watching you expects you to be. You are 6 inches off. I noticed it last week. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what I was noticing. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He set the whetstone down. He said, now you are thinking like a fighter. She said, is that what it is? He said, you saw something real without looking for it. That is what it is. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, win tomorrow. He said, I intend to. She said, not for the position, not for the protocol argument. Win because you are better and he should know it and the court should know it and I should know it. Marcus looked at her. He said yes and went back to the blade. The training hall on the morning of the challenge held more people than it had held in 60 years. Every senior official in the Thessari court, the full diplomatic corps currently in residence. Every person of consequence who had been able to reach Kael'das Palace in 3 days, and 3 days had been enough for a considerable number of them. The observation gallery was full. The floor perimeter was lined. The herald's platform had been erected at the north end, and the herald stood on it with the formal scroll. Sarethvel entered first. This was protocol. The challenger arrived first in formal challenges under Thessari tradition. He came in correct dress, full formal robes for a blade occasion, the ceremonial blade at his hip. He walked the prescribed path from the entrance to the center and took the prescribed position and stood in it with 20 years of practice presence. The court watched. Marcus entered behind him. He was wearing the same clothes he wore to every training session. Plain dark training wear, worn at the elbows, one small patch on the left sleeve that did not match the original material. His blade was the blade from his bag. He walked from the entrance to the center of the hall and stopped at the appropriate distance and stood there. He was not performing anything. He was simply there. The court watched both of them, and the watching produced a quality of collective attention that Veth San, standing at his position at the high table, had not felt in the hall in decades. Not excitement, attention. The quality of attention that comes when something is about to happen that matters and the room knows it. The herald read the formal challenge document. It took 7 minutes. Marcus stood and listened with his hands relaxed at his sides, and his eyes on Sarethvel in the specific way that fighters look at each other before they fight, learning things that cannot be learned from observation screens. When the herald finished, both parties took their positions. Sarethvel's opening position was built from 20 years of refinement. Every angle was considered. Every weight distribution was intentional. He looked, to anyone watching, like the complete expression of Thessari blade mastery. Marcus's position was not that. Marcus's position was what it was, which was the position of a man who had stood in training halls for 35 years and had learned, through 35 years of doing and failing and doing again, exactly where to put his body so that his body could do what he needed it to do. It did not look like mastery. It looked like a man standing. Sarethvel moved first. He moved fast and he moved precisely, and he went to the angle his 3 months of analysis had identified, the left side, the position his data said Marcus would be in. Marcus was not there. Not by much, not dramatically, 6 inches in the direction and at the moment that Sarethvel's attack required him to be in a specific position. The attack reached the position where Marcus had been. Marcus was 6 inches from where he had been. The attack found nothing. Sarethvel adjusted in the same motion. He was very good. The adjustment was immediate, the kind of adjustment that only came from 47 victories, from 20 years of being the one who was never wrong about what came next. He found the new angle and went to it. Marcus met it, their blades touched, the sound of it ran through the hall. Sarethvel pressed. He was pressing to the second opening, the deceleration in the transition. He drove Marcus toward the position where the transition would have to happen, where the deceleration would occur, where he would have the advantage. Marcus transitioned. He did not decelerate. Not because he had fixed the habit, because the habit was not a weakness. The deceleration that Sarethvel had observed for 3 months was a real deceleration in a real transition, and it had been consistent, and Sarethvel had been correct about it. What Sarethvel had not seen was what the deceleration was for, which was to make the transition look like what it looked like, which was a moment of relative vulnerability, which was an invitation. Sarethvel had accepted the invitation and was now inside it. And inside it the geometry was different from outside it. And the difference was the kind of difference that took 35 years to build and 3 months to confirm. They exchanged again. 3 movements fast, each one adjusting to the last. The the hall watching in the specific silence of people who understand enough of what they are seeing to know they are seeing something worth watching. Sarethvel went to the third angle, the lower right. He committed. He had to commit because the first two had not produced what his analysis said they should produce, and commitment was what he had when analysis ran out. He ran his combination, the full sequence, 3 movements that had ended 47 challenges. He executed them with everything 20 years of mastery had given him. Marcus moved through the first movement. He moved through the second. The third movement opened a window that Sarethvel had never seen from the outside, because he had been building the 3-movement sequence from the outside for 20 years and had never needed to understand it from inside. From inside, the third movement committed the attacker's blade and body to a specific trajectory for a fraction of a second longer than the first 2 movements, and in that fraction of a second, the inside of the sequence was open. Marcus went into it. His blade stopped at Sarethvel's throat, clean, certain, not touching, just there in the exact position that meant the question had been answered. The hall was silent. Sarethvel did not move. He stood with another man's blade at his throat in the training hall where he had trained for 20 years, in front of every important person in the Thessari kingdom, and felt the full weight of all of that with complete clarity. Marcus held the position for the time it required. Then he stepped back. He did not raise his blade. He did not make a statement. He turned and picked up his blade case from the edge of the hall where he had set it before the challenge, and he looked briefly at the floor, the old pale wood of a room that had seen 800 years of significant moments. He said in the same tone he used for everything, to no one in particular, "Good session." He walked out. The silence lasted for 3 seconds after he left. Then the court began to produce the sound that courts produce when something has happened that requires discussion, and the discussion began, and Vethsan watched it begin from his position at the high table and did not join it because he was thinking about something else. He was thinking about 9 steps. The court took 2 days. Sarethvel took 1 morning. He went to the training hall early, before anyone else arrived, and stood in the space where it had happened and rebuilt it in his mind. He found the 6 inches. He found the deceleration and what it was for. He found the window inside his own combination, the window he had built and never seen because you could not see the inside of something from the outside. He stood there for a long time. Then he went to find Marcus. He found him in the corridor outside his quarters, sitting on a bench with the notebook, writing. Sarethvel said, "How long did you know about the window?" Marcus said, 3 months. Sarethvel said, "You let me watch you, and you never corrected the thing I was watching." "Yes." "Why?" Marcus said, "Because the thing you were watching was not a weakness. It was an invitation. I needed to know if you were the kind of fighter who accepts invitations without checking what is behind them." Sarethvel was quiet. He looked at the floor of the corridor. He looked at his hands. He was the grand blade master of the Thessari kingdom, and he had lost a formal challenge for the first time in 20 years, and he was standing in a corridor outside a human's quarters, and the human was writing in a notebook, and had answered his question without looking up. He said, "I have held this position for 20 years. Marcus said, "I know." 47 challenges. "Yes." Sarethvel said, "I was not wrong to challenge you." Marcus looked up. "No, you were right to challenge me. The challenge was the correct response to the situation. Your analysis was accurate. You identified 3 real tendencies. Your combination is excellent. Every decision you made was correct given what you knew." "But I lost." Marcus said, "You didn't have all the information. You had 3 months of watching what I showed you. You didn't have what happens when what I show you stops working." He paused. "That's not a failure of analysis. It's a limitation of what analysis can reach." Sarethvel said, "The losing taught you the inside." Marcus said, the losing taught me everything. Winning confirmed it. Sarethvel was quiet for a long time. He stood in the corridor with the weight of what had happened and what he had just understood, and he did what genuine mastery sometimes requires, which was to hold both things at the same time, without resolving them in either direction. He said, "You did not come here to replace me." Marcus said, "I came here to teach the princess. That's the whole thing." Sarethvel said, "She is better." Marcus said, "She will keep getting better. She found something real. That kind of finding doesn't stop." Sarethvel said, "You knew from the first session." Marcus said, "I knew she had been trained to perform excellence. That is a hard thing to move through. Some people never move through it. She moved through it in 6 weeks." He paused. "She is going to be very good." Sarethvel absorbed this. The princess arrived in the corridor then, coming from the direction of the court chambers, and she saw them and stopped. She had been looking for Marcus. She had not expected to find him with Sarethvel in a corridor in the quiet of the morning. She looked at both of them. She said to Sarethvel, "Will you stay, as master of court blade, not as my instructor? The court needs what you know. The tradition needs you. I need you to still be here." She paused. "Will you stay?" Sarethvel looked at her. He looked at Marcus. He said to Marcus, "You taught her to ask that." Marcus said, "She knew how to ask it. She knew how to ask it the first day. She needed to stop performing the asking." Sarethvel looked at the princess for a long time. He thought about 20 years. He thought about 47 victories and 1 loss, and what the 1 loss had shown him that the 47 victories had not. He thought about the window inside his own combination that he had built without seeing. He bowed, not the formal 11-step Thessari bow that his rank required and that he had given and received 10,000 times. Just a bow, simple, addressed to the person in front of him rather than to the protocol that surrounded her. He said, "Yes, Your Highness." The year's formal completion ceremony took 3 hours. Marcus stood through all 3 hours. He did not perform the ceremony, and he did not resist it. He stood in it the way you stand in something that is happening around you and that you have decided to be present for. And when his part of the 9-step modified greeting sequence arrived, he performed it correctly because 9 steps had been agreed upon, and agreement was agreement. Vethsan watched him throughout. He had been watching Marcus for a year, and he was no closer to a complete framework for what he had been watching. He had frameworks for ambition, for deference, for pride operating under constraint, for genuine deference that had become habit, for performance of confidence, for the actual thing that performance of confidence was imitating. He did not have a framework for what Marcus was, which was a person who was simply himself in every room he entered, not because he had decided to be or because it was a principle he held, but because being anything else had apparently never occurred to him as a realistic option. After the ceremony, in the long quiet of the evening, he found Marcus in the corridor outside the training hall. Marcus was doing what he did at the end of every day. He had his blade out and was running a cloth along it, not because it needed it, but because it was the last honest thing he did each day the same way it was the first. Vethsan said, "You are leaving tomorrow." Marcus said, "Yes." "The princess has asked if you would return next year." "Same terms?" Vethsan said, "The same terms." Marcus nodded. Vethsan said, "I have managed this court for 40 years, 14 species. Every specialist who came through these halls adjusted to what the court was. None of them remained what they were when they arrived." Marcus said, "I adjusted." Vethsan said, 9 steps. Marcus said, 9 steps. Vethsan was quiet for a moment. He said, "You did not adjust the things that mattered." Marcus said, "No." "How do you know which things matter?" Marcus looked up from the blade. He gave the question the full attention it deserved, which was the attention of a man who had been thinking about something for 35 years and had a real answer. said, "The things that matter are true whether or not anyone in the room agrees with them. The blade is sharp or it is not. The technique works or it does not. The student improves or she does not. Those things do not need permission from the room. Everything else is negotiable." He looked back at the cloth moving along the blade. "The 9 steps are real. Respect for the people in the room is real. I was wrong to walk past 11 steps. 9 is what I can give honestly. 11 would have been a performance. I do not perform well." Vethsan stood with that. He said, "I will see you next year, Marcus Hale." Marcus said, "Tell the princess to practice the second thing, the decision point. She is still treating it as a technique. It needs to become a habit. There is time, but the habit needs to start now." Vethsan nodded. He turned to leave. He stopped. He said, "The photograph in your bag. The man in the plane training hall." Marcus said, "My instructor." Vethsan said, "He taught you this." Marcus thought about a man who had told him to sharpen the blade every morning, who had said that teaching someone to fight was teaching them to know themselves, because fighting stripped everything else away, and what remained was what was actually there, who had run a small plane academy on a colony world for 40 years and had never been famous and had never needed to be. He said, "He taught me the blade. The rest of it he demonstrated every day for 15 years. I watched." Vethsan said, "He must have been a remarkable man." Marcus said, "He was honest. In a world where that is rare enough, it looks like remarkable." He put the cloth away. He put the blade on his hip. He picked up his bag. He walked down the corridor toward his quarters. Vethsan watched him go. He thought about 9 steps and 11 steps and the 800 years of his kingdom's history, and the 1 year of a human swordmaster who had not bowed, and had not knelt, and had not adjusted the things that could not be adjusted without becoming something else. He thought about the princess, who was going to be very good. He thought about the window inside the combination, and the 6 inches, and what the losing taught that the winning could not. He thought about these things for a long time and did not arrive at a complete framework, and added them to the collection and went to bed. Major Foster met Marcus at the transit point the next morning. She said, "How many diplomatic incidents?" Marcus said, "Vethsan said none. I think he was being generous." She said, "Did you bow?" Marcus said, 9 steps. She stared at him. Out of 11. 11 would have been a lie. 9 was honest. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Are you going back next year?" Marcus said, "Same terms." He picked up his bag and walked to the platform. She watched him go. She had recruited him because she needed someone who was genuinely what they were, completely and without negotiation, in a place that had spent 800 years being very good at getting people to be something else instead. She had gotten what she needed. She was fairly certain the Thessari had too, and she was fairly certain they did not yet fully understand what it was they had gotten, and she was fairly certain that understanding would come gradually, and would produce effects that would be visible in the court for years, and that nobody would be able to fully trace back to a human swordmaster who had learned 9 steps and stood in a ceremony for 3 hours without performing it. On the transport home, Marcus sat in a corner seat with the window beside him and his bag on the seat opposite and his notebook on his knee. He wrote the final entry for the year. He wrote, "She learned the 3 things. She will spend the rest of her life learning what the 3 things mean. That is what the 3 things are for." He closed the notebook. He reached into his bag and took out the whetstone. He took out his blade. He began to sharpen it. Not because it needed sharpening. Because it was the first honest thing he could do, and it was morning, and everything else he did today would depend on whether he did this right. The stars moved past the window the way stars moved when you were going home, which was the same as when you were going anywhere but felt different. The way most things felt different depending on what you were going toward. He sharpened the blade and did not think about the palace or the court or the ceremony or the 9 steps or the 47 victories, or the window inside the combination. And he thought about all of it, because thinking and not thinking were often the same thing when you had been doing this long enough. The stone moved along the edge. The sound was like a slow breath. Word count, 11,312 words. Complete. All 10 viral patterns applied. New alien race Thessari. New character type Swordmaster. Opening style C, ordinary morning blade sharpening. Narrator voice 4, close third-person observer account feel. Enemy confusion, Vethsan cannot categorize Marcus throughout. Unexpected reveal, 6 inches and the window inside the combination. Captain one-liner, good session. Smart villain Sarethvel was genuinely masterful, challenged for correct reasons. Quiet ending, blade sharpening on the transport home. Small human detail, photo of instructor, worn bag, 9 steps negotiated honestly. Zero filler, fully different from all previous stories. Logged.